So we should, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to everybody, including colleagues in Pakistan and across the world who have joined us live today on the Zoom meeting and as well as our Facebook page. Just to say that this session will be recorded and will be available on YouTube after completion, so that if somebody wants to refer back, that will be the medium we should turn to. My name is Dr. Najib Ahmed. I am a consultant radiologist and a senior lecturer in hybrid imaging in Hull, UK. And I will be moderating this session on behalf of the Impact team. Just a very quick introduction to Impact. It's a UK-based non-profit voluntary organization, and the aim really is to build capacity and transfer knowledge to our colleagues in Pakistan in the medical professional. And currently, obviously, everybody, including ourselves, are focusing on the COVID-19 pandemic. We have organized a number of sessions to this effect, and in the last few months, I collaborated with very distinguished experts from both the USA and UK. We would appreciate people who are joining today. So if they so wish, please visit our Facebook page, follow, like the page, and disseminate the current and future session information for the benefit of other people and colleagues around you. I'll just kick off just a couple of acknowledgements before we formally start the session, to acknowledge the help and support and certainly the encouragement of various individuals and institutions, which has led to multiple successful educational events, which includes obviously the Government of Sindh and the Department of Health in Sindh for coordinating, and disseminating the information rapidly. King Edward Medical University for coordination in Punjab, the Yarane Watan program, as well as all the vice chancellors of the medical universities who have participated and are currently online for this session. And this is not an exhaustive list, so my apologies if I have missed out anyone. I'm going to briefly summarize how this session is going to be run. We aim to have an interactive session today with less lecture type presentation and more interaction between the panelists, speakers, and our audience. The theme revolves around evidence-based medicine. As we all know, we are living in pretty unprecedented times. And in COVID-19, what we have seen is that we started from a place where we knew very little about this disease. And now certainly there is a huge deluge of information, statistics, and certainly papers coming out on a daily basis. I must say that there is quite a lot of noise in between all this information. So it's important really to revisit and refresh our principles of how evidence-based or objective practice of medicine should be done. We are very fortunate to have two distinguished speakers. The pattern would be that they will deliver a short talk, around 15 to 20 minutes each. This will be followed by a few curated questions which we have come up with the help of the Impact team, which we will discuss with the speakers. And after this first part of the session, we will open the floor to our audience, who can then participate in this, the discussion in the second part of the session. So a couple of very quickly housekeeping rules so that we maintain the decorum of the session and there is limited interruptions. The audience will be muted for the first hour until we finish the first session. When we do open the floor, you can use the Zoom function to chat or draw your attention to the moderator. Raise your hand if you want to ask questions. People who are joining on Facebook can post their question in the comment section and we will try to pick them up as much as possible. Please introduce yourself and your designation and affiliations when you ask the question, and please be brief because we have probably going to be, quite a lot of things to go through. So without further ado, let's kick off the session. We are privileged to have two excellent speakers, and I thank both of them for their voluntary participation. And certainly I must point out that Dr. Chotani is in true sense burning the midnight oil somewhere in Virginia. It's quite late, it's around 2 o'clock there. And I think, it's enough to gauge his passion to participate in an educational activity in Pakistan. So thank you very much, both of you. Our first speaker is Dr. Khurram Khan, who is a honorary associate professor and a consultant medical oncologist at University College Hospital in London. He has a high research degree. He trained in oncology at the Royal Marsden, which is obviously the biggest cancer center, and has got significant research interest. He has published around more than 40 publications in very high impact journals, including Science, which I think has an impact factor of 37, and Cancer Discovery, and amongst various other journals of high repute. He is also a member of the National Research and Ethics Committee, and he will kick off the session by talking on the basis or the basics of critical review of literature. So Dr. Khan, you have the floor. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed and the Impact Organization for this extremely kind invite. I will just allow me a second. Let me make sure that it's on. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. You just need to start the slideshow and I think it.
Yeah. Right. So I will spend the next 15-20 minutes in talking about what is evidence-based medicine. I know that all of us are aware of it in some shape and form, but I think with the advances in medicine, there are two different aspects which we need to cover. Now, before I kick off, actually, so these are the two hospitals which I'm affiliated with, the University College London Hospital and North Middlesex University Hospital, where I spend a day or a couple of days a week, actually. And I'm the research lead there in both hospitals. So my disclosures, I think it's important to highlight that evidence-based medicine is important and we all make mistakes. So I had very likely COVID-19 disease in March, and I took hydrochloroquine, actually, not based on the recommendation of this gentleman, but at the time, that is what the evidence was pointing towards. So there is no harm in actually admitting your mistakes and moving forward. So what do I want people to take home? I think the first thing is actually if we have a good handle on what actually comprises of evidence-based medicine, what are the levels of evidence and what their relevance is. And I think what we all agree is that in the end, what we want to achieve is good patient experience and improved patient outcomes. To me, the most key factor here is actually pivotal factor is communication in terms of bridging the gap. And that's what I think I would appreciate Impact again on this front, that this is what we all are trying to do today, to bridge the gap, pass on the knowledge from one place to other and learn from each other. So evidence-based medicine, I think that the top agenda for me today is how important it is to have the ability to critically evaluate the literature. We know that it is important in terms of guiding treatment. So you have treatment pathways for different diseases, different guidelines, and that comes from critical evaluation of literature. Because everything that is published is not reputable. It may vary from time to time. It may change actually. Evidence changes and it evolves. And the second aspect is guiding management. So remember, treatment is one aspect of the holistic approach, which we call as management, because management takes into account the social aspects, the holistic aspects, variety of aspects, actually, financial aspects of the patients, particularly pertinent to our patients in Pakistan. So we have to take all of those into account when we form our guidelines in any place. I really love this saying. I mean, the picture in the background shows that there was a time when obviously, number of physicians were surrounding a patient who was lying naked and they were doing their bits actually. And this has evolved and people have now got the basic ethics of how to treat the patients. However, I'll read it out actually. A 21st century clinician who cannot critically lead a study is as unprepared as one who cannot take a blood pressure or examine the cardiovascular system. So I think, this is just to highlight that the critical evaluation of literature actually is as pertinent as any other medical skills. So here, what we need to achieve is the balance between the clinical knowledge and the evolving research. And again, the key is actually this, these two people sitting in the middle who are the patients or patient and their relative. And this gentleman who's treating them actually needs to balance the two acts and provide the best possible management. Now let's go through a few different forms of evidence which are available. You might have seen this picture of Obama sitting in Karachi in 1981 with someone. So this is what I say a case report is, right? So look at this and tell me what it is actually. So some of you might say Obama in 1981 knew that he would be the president of America in the later years, was conspiring against Pakistan whilst he was in Pakistan. That could be one conclusion. And trust me, there must be some people who are possibly reaching that conclusion as well. The other conclusion could be that the gentleman on the right of your screens, betrayed Obama, took him to Pakistan and did something fishy there. But however, this is actually what happened. So he was there having his holidays or with a college trip, which is a very common happening. I think the point I'm trying to make is that when you have just a single case report, sometimes people draw a lot of conclusions from that. They may be correct, they may be entirely inappropriate conclusions. So it has to be seen within the context of what the evidence shows. Now, this is what the case series looks like. So 4 unfortunate handicapped children sitting in front of a pool. Do you think it is actually an electric problem which led to this handicapped issue with the children? Or are they sitting there thinking that, we wish, they're wishing that they could actually be part of that swimming process as well in the pool? So I think, again, case series are slightly more powerful juncture compared to case reports, but nevertheless, still very biased. People can actually draw their own conclusions based on what they feel is appropriate or what they feel is not appropriate. Large cohort studies. Now, you look at this picture and you perhaps get the impression that, this is a 1945 victory speech from the British Prime Minister of that time, Mr. Churchill. When you look at the headline, however, these days, sorry, I'm not sure what happened here. So what you find out though is that actually more recently, there have been claims that the gentleman was a racist. So I would suggest that at least for any cohort studies, no matter what the numbers are, read at least the headline. I think that's the minimum I would request you to do today, because sometimes there are papers who are giving negative data and you look at the headline, which may be misleading, and you might get the wrong message. So regardless of what the quality of the paper is, you will never know what the paper demonstrates unless you read through it. So what is the challenge? I think the biggest challenge is that we have about 5,000 papers on biomedical today. We have about 2,000 papers on Medline. We have 75 trials concluded per day. And there are several diagnostic new papers coming out as well. So how do we find out what to follow, what not to follow? So again, I came across with this definition from British Medical Journal, which was published some time ago. And they defined evidence-based medicine. I'll read out actually: conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of an individual patient. And I'll be stressing upon this later on actually in my talk as well, what this individual patient means. So you may have actually this form of evidence. As I said initially, one of the best approaches is the holistic approach. So you might be treating a patient. I treat cancer normally. So, there are many medicines which are actually potentially beneficial, but they may not have significant enough benefits in order to introduce them in a system where you're already struggling to have the basic medicines. So I think we need to take everything into account. Now, levels of medicines, you must have seen this slide many times, and it becomes boring to a point. But I think the key is that we should have an awareness of what the levels of medicines are. So level 1 medicine, level 1 type of evidence is the evidence when you have at least data backed up from one randomized controlled trial or meta-analysis from multiple randomized closed trials. So the key is randomized controlled trial. But remember, this is not always possible, and we'll come to it in a second. Then evidence obtained from level 2 is at least one well-designed controlled study without randomization. This is again a prospective study. Level 3 evidence is obtained from well-designed non-experimental descriptive studies. And then as you go down, you come down to expert committee reports, opinions, and clinical experience. And I think that's where we need to be very careful. I have written guidelines for the European Society of Medical Oncology for different cancers. And I can tell you that even that is a very thorough peer-reviewed process. Yes, the opinions are asked for, but it's not without a reason. So sometimes we confuse this with personal opinions without evidence to support that. I mean, any form of evidence to support that, and which is where we need to be extremely careful. Then the next step is grading of recommendation. And I'll not read through all of that, but I think likewise, once you know what level of evidence you're talking about, then you can further grade them depending on the quality of the studies, which again takes you back to what I said in the beginning, that our key is to have ability to critically evaluate the literature. Now, one of the things that has changed in recent times actually is biology-based evidence. So if you think about the randomized controlled trials, the evidence is generated from a statistical hypothesis. Now, there is a biology behind that as well, but actually the key to those trials is that, for example, the statistician would sit with you and tell you that you need to have 1,000 patients, you need to show this, that, and that in order to prove that your drug is, for example, non-inferior to the other drug. And that's how things are considered. But the difference now is, and that is where my personal research was. So I will skip through the next few slides rather quickly because it's not directly relevant to COVID, but more relevant to how we interpret the literature. So this is what I was alluding upon earlier, personalized medicine. This is very relevant to the COVID treatments as well, because we know that a lot of treatments which became available had their own side effects. And it is relevant to what I practice on a day-to-day basis. A lot of anti-cancer therapies have significant number of side effects. So even when we put them in the clinical trials perspective, we have to balance the drug toxicity with the benefit that we are achieving from the treatment. And you can see there are 4 scenarios, 4 patient groups. So you can have a drug that is not toxic but not beneficial on the bottom of your screen's left-hand side. Then on the right-hand side, drug not toxic and beneficial. On the left top screen, drug toxic but beneficial, which is the very common scenario. And then on the top right, drug toxic and not beneficial, which is the worst case scenario. So you try to put in most patients in the right bottom actually of your screen, the green smiley ones, where you want the drug to be not toxic and beneficial, which is very difficult to achieve, as I said. So you find the best balance for your patients. So there are different ways you can contribute to research. And these are some of the examples of things that I have published over the years. But I think, the point I'm trying to highlight here is that you can do good service evaluation. You can be part of translational research. You can lead investigator-initiated trials. You can lead sponsored clinical trials. The sponsored clinical trials, investigator-initiated trials, and to some extent, translational research is challenging, particularly in Pakistan. But remember, we can always contribute by service evaluation even. So I think don't be shy of contributing to the research, because the more you become part of it, the better you will be actually equipped to run bigger studies in future as well. So next 3-4 slides, just bear with me actually. This is just to demonstrate how with small numbers you can still achieve a lot. So these were some of the studies which were biology based. So if you look at the 5th column where it says marker, without going into too many details, the point of these studies was that you identified a mutation or a problem in the tumors of these patients. And then you targeted that with a drug which actually has a specific action on that pathway. So with that, what you see is that even though the numbers of the patients are small in these papers, but they've met the requirements of journals like New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, again, NEJM. So all I'm trying to highlight here is that if you actually see a paper in NEJM, Lancet, Cancer Discovery, or any bigger journals with an impact factor in excess of 20, for example, there is some reason why that paper has reached that level. And you must remember that, you know, you need to critically appraise that in order to be able to establish why people, you know, were successful in getting those papers in those journals and why they may be relevant to your clinical practice. Now, this is one of my colleagues, Marco Gerlinger, who did this study. Actually, it went to NEJM in 2012. And what they showed, very new thing, was that in cancer, for example, you can have different levels of heterogeneity. And based on that, I conducted my own research as well. And let me come to it. Actually, I'm skipping through these slides. So I looked at the liquid biopsies, which is again relevant to this COVID era, because a lot of research now is directed towards looking at the antibodies. So if I just refresh your memory, actually, for diagnosis of cancer or many other diseases, you do require tissue samples. And one of the issues with tissue sampling, particularly in the cancer patients, is once they progress, it is difficult to rebiopsy them again and again. So in my research, I focused on actually collecting blood samples and at different critically important time points, and correlated the findings with the tissue samples. And what we found actually was that we were able to negatively select some patients who were offered certain therapies which were not of any benefit to them. Again, coming back to how this translates into the example of COVID, is that we know that there were drugs, you know, which had high toxicity profile, and we were basing all that assumption on the assumption that actually the death from COVID comes from what we call a so-called cytokine storm in certain cases. So we were actually inhibiting the immunity of the patients at certain time point. So I think the important thing here to highlight is that this may vary from patient to patient. So you might actually argue that in patients who are in early stage of their disease, if you had the knowledge of selecting the right patients, maybe the outcomes could have been optimized. So finally, this is the last slide on my own research. What I showed in this research, which went to cancer discovery in the end, was that, you know, like you predict the weather, and people who live in States or Europe, they know that the weather prediction is really accurate, to the point that it surprised me when I first came to UK that people used to say, oh, tomorrow between 3 to 4 p.m. actually there is rain. I used to think, I mean, how do they know actually? So we found out that it is so precise medicine. And this is what we were trying to do in terms of predicting the behavior of the tumor in my research as well. Now, what is the challenge? So we talked about the big journals publishing all these papers. And then we find out that a quick research article went into Lancet, very high impact journal, and then gets retracted. And that was the same was the outcome of many other papers, including a paper that went to New England Journal of Medicine. I think this will make you ask the next question, which I was asked very frankly by some other people, that if your medicine is not that effective, then is there a difference between totkas and evidence? And I thought that the question was relevant enough for me to include it in this presentation. So the answer is no, it is not, because the first question is whether for the totkas, do you follow a process? No, you don't. In the interest of time, I couldn't go through what the processes are followed in order to meet the criteria for one drug making to the clinic. You know, trust me, it takes, I mean, again, in COVID, actually, we were in an unprecedented situation where patients were dying within 2 weeks of their diagnosis in some cases. So obviously, a lot of this literature had to be rushed through, fast-tracked into those journals so that people could benefit from that wherever there was a ray of hope. But in reality, the processes are really stringent. Actually, to get a paper into a high-impact journal, as Dr. Chotani will probably also emphasize later on, is it takes years, actually, years of hard work, efforts from a team of people who are very talented people, and a lot of resources. Compliance. So, I mean, even if your totkas are useful or you think they're useful, you know, how can patients be compliant with them? Actually, the compliance is low, so you will never actually find out the reality. Evidence everywhere in the world is being used, and therefore the compliance is high. Future implications from totkas, I think nil. Evidence, yes. So, things can change, they can evolve over time, but as long as you're following the right processes and following the evidence, I think that's the key. Time spent, totkas, none actually. So I can come up with a totka today and say that, you have X amount of, ginger in your tea and that will cure your corona. And actually, we've seen such totkas. There are people who have gone in public domain claiming that there were different things which could cure the corona, and that was very lethal in Pakistan in many cases. Evidence takes days to years to evolve. Reproducibility, again, nil for totkas, unfortunately. Evidence, yes, it is used everywhere. Multiple sampling, so you have multiple samples, actually, multiple examples. You even after the way the evidence evolves is that you have a trial that demonstrates the efficacy of a drug, and then people share their own experiences. So a drug, yes, you can argue that a drug which has been licensed in Europe and America may not be effective for patients in Pakistan. This is a point of argument, but the Pakistani people using that particular drug can also share their evidence. An amount of trust, I think on totkas there is a variability, particularly in Pakistan. Some people do trust them, but evidence is robust. Statistical considerations, there are none, or if not zero, I mean, they're very low. So do you know that, how many patients were treated with a certain regime, what the outcomes were, apart from the claims? And training, I think this is the key, which I would like to emphasize upon. I mean, even when you hire a driver, you think about what their training is, how long they've been driving the car, and how they've come up with that, with the belief that they can actually drive you safely. So here in totkas, there is no training. Anybody can stand up and say, this is what I believe is correct. Whilst for evidence, it's years and years of training. I mean, very quickly, I would share with you that I completed my training in oncology in 2012. And then I spent 6 years on a low pay grade actually to complete my research. So it's an extensive, and that doesn't take into account 5 years of my medical training and house job and everything else. And clinical significance, I've used 3 words: nil, none, and zero. I'm sorry, I'm harsh here, but I think that is what totkas are. With evidence, there is high enough evidence there actually to follow that. So what do we do? Aggregating information, the collaborations between scientists, clinical researchers, physicians, and in the end, patients as well. Look at the molecular disease models as well. And everything is integrated with each other in order to achieve what I say is the successful research. And I think the last slide, I would emphasize that the key is collaboration, which is what thankfully with on this platform through Impact we are doing, and respect. And I say this with a lot of emphasis that I think sometimes we forget that respect is the key to any collaboration. It doesn't mean that, if somebody is sitting in US or UK like myself or Dr. Chotani or Dr. Ahmed or anybody else. So I think we all need to understand that people are doing their jobs in their own environments, and we need to respect each other in order to progress further. I'll leave it there actually, and I'm sorry if I've gone over the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. We will start taking questions later on. So we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Professor Rashid Chotani, who has spent over 20 years providing expertise in infectious disease epidemiology with a focus on influenza, SARS, coronavirus, MERS coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2, Zika, Ebola, and other infectious diseases. Public health, and he has expertise in emergency management, and he has contributed to various public agencies, private industry, and academic and non-profit organization. He is a well-respected expert in medical countermeasures development and biosecurity, and was awarded the prestigious NATO Scientific Award for Counterterrorism in 2016. He currently fulfills many roles in private and academic sector. He is a medical director for IEM and an adjunct professor of epidemiology at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. To his credit, there are at least 50 peer-reviewed papers particularly important related to planning of pandemics and detection of disease outbreaks. And therefore, I think he is eminently placed to discuss how COVID-19 is, progressing in Pakistan, and certainly the preparation of, if there is a second wave. So, Dr. Chutani, you've got the con. Thanks.
Well, Assalamu alaikum, and good morning, I guess, to folks in Pakistan. First of all, thank you so much, Khurram, and all the rest of the folks, Dr. Najib, etc., who have set up this, incredible meeting. And I see a ton of people who've joined. I have stopped counting because I keep seeing people popping up and joining the meeting. So I think we've got hundreds of people that have joined, and I think there are lots of people who are sharing when they're joining. So there are quite a few people from across Pakistan and different places that have participated. Now, Dr. Khurram Khan had specifically talked about, how you validate data, how you look at data, how you do the things that are critical in order to understand and appreciate what is a good study, what's a bad study. What I'm going to talk about is some of the things that are going on, and we'll all try to understand some of that data and understand what needs to be done in Pakistan to make sure that the second wave, when we see the second wave coming, we can deal with it. So the questions that will arise from that is what I'm more interested in. So I'll probably go very quickly with this presentation, and we'll touch on a few things that are related to research and how you evaluate research during this talk. So first of all, we all know about coronavirus, so I'm not going to talk about it, but one of the critical things when you do research and when you're looking at something, you've got to understand what you're looking at. What is it that it matters, to understand and appreciate the structure of a virus? What are the critical points? Where does the virus attach to the whole cell? Is it an envelope virus or is it a non-envelope virus? Is it does it have a big thick layer or it doesn't have a thick layer? Because that is how you're going to understand and appreciate a virus. Is it an RNA virus or a DNA virus? What type of other qualities does it have? So those are the critical things that are important for anybody to understand and appreciate before going forward. Once you do that, you have to take a look at what has this disease ever caused any problems before? And we all know that 2003, SARS came and then it disappeared, and we'll talk a little bit about it. And then we had another similar virus that attacked us, and that was a severe acute respiratory syndrome that appeared in the Middle East. And that, appeared and then, still is going on. So we had known about this virus. We have seen this virus in the past. In 2019, we saw what we initially called, and we still call coronavirus or SARS virus 2. So there are multiple names to it, and we will, not go into too many details on that. But in 2003, we saw this particular virus that emerged, which was called the SARS virus. And then after a year, and you see the epidemic curve over there, it just disappeared. It had a pretty high case fatality rate. It affected and spread across the world, but it spread in 26 countries. And then after that first year, we did not see it again. It just disappeared. That's something that we have to keep in mind, and as a learning point, and we've seen it with other viruses that have shown up and then disappeared and then appeared in a very slightly different format and caused a tremendous amount of devastation. The second time a similar virus appeared was in 2012, and we had in 2014 a lot of cases, and then every single year we started seeing cases. So from here, what we learned from evidence is that this coronavirus, it seems that it kind of shows up every single year during the fall season and the winter season, but it has some sort of sustainability. It does sustain during summer. So that just threw away once I saw this, once I knew about it, because I'd worked on it, when people started saying that, COVID is going to disappear in summer, that theory was just not happening in my mind, because I saw that in MERS, as it sustained, it has continuously persisted. The other thing that threw off that theory immediately, and here is some evidence that we are talking about, then in Australia and New Zealand, where it was summertime, while in the United States, where I live, it was wintertime when this disease appeared, there were cases that were appearing, and people didn't pay any attention to that till Tom Hanks, who's a famous actor, got the disease, and his wife got the disease while they were taking a vacation in that particular part of the world. And everybody said, my God, it's summer over there. How come they have the disease? So we knew that this disease was going to continue. So here was some evidence that we had in front of us, so we appreciated it. Here, what we are looking at is the current status as to the daily cases and the testing that is being done. And this is a very important slide. And you know what here I've tried to do is to take a look at different countries, including United States, other countries such as Brazil, but neighboring countries of Pakistan, such as Iran, Italy, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And you see that there are why is it that the disease is affecting certain countries in a much bigger way compared to other countries? Why is it that the CFR over here is a crude fatality rate? It's not the case fatality rate. It's crude right now. We don't know all. We don't have access to all the data. So why is it that the crude fatality rate is so different among all these countries? Now, the other important thing that we have to understand and appreciate, and if you've all heard about testing, and I'll talk a little bit more about testing, what you see on the extreme column is testing per million people. And you see that there are countries that have tested a lot. There are countries that have kind of not tested at all. So here are things, here are clues, epidemiological clues that can tell you as to what is going on in a country. Also, you have to understand and appreciate that there are certain countries that obviously have a very strong disease reporting system. And then there are countries that don't have a very strong disease reporting system. For example, in Pakistan, the disease reporting system is not very strong. And the reason that I say that is between 2005, I was at the NIH. I established a global infectious disease surveillance and alert program over there. And I worked on the disease early warning system, as well as establishing the epidemic investigation cell. And one of the things that was kind of difficult for me to understand and appreciate is why is it that private physicians do not report reportable disease. There is a reportable disease list in Pakistan, but only government-based facilities report that. And about 25%, only 25% or maybe less of the Pakistani population actually utilizes that public service where reporting happens. So is it true to say that the number of cases that appeared in Pakistan, the 259 or about 260,000 cases and 5,475 deaths, is that accurate data? I am not sure, because there are a lot of people that probably have not been able to report that disease because the system is just not strong enough. And the data, and there are people that are sitting probably over there who are more familiar with it. But here in Pakistan, the HMIS system collects all that data and information. And that is one of the areas that in Pakistan needs to strengthen. So we have a very good disease surveillance system so that we can get real good data, so we can actually do something with that data. Right now, we are getting part of the data and we don't understand it as much. But one thing for sure, with all the data that we are getting right now, what we are seeing is, as you can see, Pakistan, the numbers are slightly coming down, which is a good thing. But that does not mean that we have to let our guard down, because as you can see in the United States, the guard was let down when the curve was flattened, and now we are in big problems, big trouble. And by the end of this month, we'll probably have 100,000 cases per day, which is just unbelievable and terrible. Here is the data that demonstrates in terms of, it's a rolling average. It is logarithmic data, and it shows the deaths across different countries. And you can see very clearly that in Pakistan, the number of deaths have, right here in Pakistan, the number of deaths have started declining, which is a good trend. But remember, if the guard is let down from an epidemiological perspective, what's going to happen is that you'll have more cases, and the deaths come 2 weeks after the increase in cases. So we have to wait. We have to see what's going on, and we have to be very cautious, because you can see in this particular case that Indonesia was doing pretty good, and now slowly the numbers are going up. In Italy, again, the numbers are going up, and various other countries, the numbers are going up. So we've got to be very careful and cautious. What are the critical interventions that are out there that are available right now based upon evidence-based data that we have? The number one thing that we have available, which is what I call is the lockdown and shelter in place. We have all gone through that. Pakistan has gone through that. United States has gone through that. UK has gone through that. And some of the places, for example, in the United States, are going back to the lockdown and shelter phase because we are having some problems, because we know that we were able to decrease the infection rate because of that. That is evidence-based information. Now, the other thing that what I call is the societal measures, where you're volunteering yourself and isolating yourself, because we know that if I am sick and if I'm not out, I'm not going to be infecting 2.5 people minimum. That's the R naught for the average R naught for COVID-19. So that is going to decrease the spread of the disease. Social distancing, we know, has helped, because when we cough and we sneeze, the chances of us infecting others is higher. Masking has worked. Hand hygiene, because this virus, it has a very fine filament around it, and with alcohol-based hand sanitizer, you can actually kill that virus. So it's a good thing. And then what I call is the triple T program, the testing, tracking, and tracing program. The tracking is essentially robust surveillance, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk a little bit about all the different remedies that are available right now, the therapeutics that are available, and what is evidence-based and what is not, perhaps, and what are the vaccines that are available, and how long does it take to develop a vaccine, and what is going on in the vaccine world right now. So we know that the societal measures, the quarantine, what we have to do is the positive cases have to be quarantined, as have been done. I'm still recommending that we do social distancing in Pakistan, masking in Pakistan, and hand hygiene in Pakistan, which is very, very important, because the numbers can go up again. The role of testing is paramount. Once a number of people infected has been successfully brought down, as it has been brought down in Pakistan right now, new waves of infection will need to be suppressed quickly. They will appear. So testing strategies are central to achieving this objective. We are still learning a lot about this virus. We are, to be honest about it, with all the different papers that have come out, all the different things that have happened, we are still confused a little bit about the infectiousness of the disease, about the incubation period of the disease, extent of asymptomatic spread, immunity, how long does it last? We still are learning about it. And again, everybody was talking initially about the impact of changes in temperature and disease spread. We are still learning about that. We don't know too much about it. So we are still learning. And it's important to follow literature that is obviously coming out in good journals, because one of the things that we have noted is that if the research was wrong, those articles have been retracted and people have learned from their mistakes. And by the way, the people that publish those articles are punished for that. It is not that they'll go scot-free. They will never be able to attain the same level in terms of academic height or all the kind of work that they were doing. So those are important things to understand and appreciate. Now, just in Pakistan, one of the big problems that people were having was, what are the different tests that are out there? And there are multiple tests that are out there, but there are two classes of tests. One is a molecular diagnostic test. The other one is a serological test. So here in the United States, we've been looking at them. There are multiple organizations that are developing these tests, but they have to go through, again, a very stringent research protocol to demonstrate to the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, that their methodology works, and their methodology has to be proven, shown in a clinical way to work, and then they will get what we call the emergency authorization use, and then they have to still demonstrate that their methodology works to get a full clearance from FDA to be able to do their work. So now, in the multiple PCR tests that are out there, there are multiple antigen tests that are being developed, and then there are multiple detection tests for immune response that are being looked at, and that's an ELISA test and a rapid test. Now, there were so many rapid tests that flooded Pakistan from Europe. And by the way, just so that everybody understands, there are multiple tests from Europe right now in the United States that were used, and all the people that use those tests are being will have to go to court for that, because those tests were not approved. Those were not right tests. So you've got to be sure you're using the right test. I'm not going to go and belabor you with all the different things. You will have availability of these slides, so you can take a look at all of them and all the different techniques and the pros and cons of each of the tests, and then make an educated decision, not just based on what I am presenting, but all the literature that is coming out and all the research that is being developed on a regular basis. One thing that I would all want you to understand and appreciate is something that we've all learned from medical school or public health school, or we've done microbiology or whatnot. There are certain things that happen and certain ways to detect a pathogen. One is that you can detect the virus, and you can detect the virus through PCR technology, and there are certain time periods where it's very valid, and then you can detect it through the blood or the serum, and that you can do through a serology test or an antibody test. And that is how the curves look, and you can detect SARS through nasopharyngeal swab to obviously virus isolation from respiratory tract, which is very difficult, which is possible, but nasopharyngeal is the easiest one. Bronchial lavage, which is very, very difficult, and nobody does it. By the way, you can actually find the virus in the stools, and it stays there. And then you have the IgM and IgG antibody. The IgM is the early detector, and the IgG is the late detector. And traditionally, if you have IgG, you're supposed to develop some immunity. But in case of COVID-19, we believe that we don't know how long does the immunity last. So you have to follow that to see what really happens with research, because we haven't had the disease for that long. The other thing is, you've got to do the tracking of these cases. Once the number of people infected has been successfully brought down, resurgence will need to be suppressed quickly. And you've got to come up with very strong strategies for tracking. And that is intelligence that you have to develop on the evolution of epidemic, including on when a threshold of the herd immunity has been reached. By the way, you cannot reach herd immunity unless and until over 60% of the population essentially is infected. So it is going to be difficult to develop herd immunity in the absence of a vaccine. In terms of tracking, there are multiple ways to track. One is called the sentinel surveillance system. You've got to take a look at different areas, different geographic areas, and be able to monitor to see how the disease is progressing. Another one is called the syndromic surveillance system. And that was a system that, between 2000 and 2005, I was able to help build in Pakistan also. And that takes a look at different, essential syndrome. It's not a disease, but a mixture of different things that you can combine together to be able to look at upper respiratory tract infections, for example, to see when they are emerging. And then through that, you go in deep into the science and be able to detect what is actually happening, which infectious disease is happening. One of the amazing things that has happened, and I told you that stools are, the virus is shed in the stools. So in the United States, we've been doing some research, and we've been able to identify at Yale and a couple other universities that if we take the sewage and look at the virus in the sewage, we will be able to detect the virus over there. And one of the amazing things about COVID-19 is that symptoms appear 1 week or longer than 1 week after you have had the disease and you've been shedding the virus. So you shed the virus for 7 to 10 days before you actually become symptomatic. So if it was in the sewage water and there were tests that were being done, then you can develop some sort of an early detection system. And that is what we are working on in the United States right now. The other one is obviously tracing. You've got to trace and trace and trace and be able to isolate people. It is a very difficult thing which requires tremendous amount of resources. And even in the United States, unfortunately, we've been unsuccessful in coming up with a very good strategy for doing contact tracing. But that is something very important. And I know that in Pakistan, contact tracing is being done. And I'm really proud of the fact that some of the states are doing a tremendous job in that. Again, the role of tracing, I cannot emphasize how important it is. But one of the critical things is that if you have a disease that you've brought down, remember the virus is still here. Virus does not leave us; it is staying with us. But what we do with all the measures that we are doing is just bringing the curve down. And once you've brought the curve down, so that you can manage those patients in the hospital, so hospital capacity is not overburdened, and the healthcare infrastructure doesn't melt down, as it happened, by the way, in a lot of cities in Pakistan, where people were looking and begging for oxygen, and you just could not find it. The reason to suppress the disease by basic measures like distancing and lockdowns and all that, so that you can manage enough people to come into the hospital and be treated. But once you have brought things down, it is important that you do high speed contact tracing, and you've got to do it in an accurate way. It's not that somebody's just doing it for the sake of doing it. You've got to do it with passion to be able to get things taken care of. Now, we've talked a lot about, different drugs that have been used, and, Dr. Najib has used, Dr. Khurram used hydroxychloroquine. There were studies that were done, and, here are all the different drugs that have been looked at, and clinical studies have been done. And if you are looking at it, and I'll go through the list, I'm not going to go through the list exhaustively, because, I've got 24 drugs that have clearly done some serious clinical research at good academic institutions. How many of these drugs have you seen come out in the market? Except a few, because a lot of these drugs, when you do these studies, fail. They do not make it because they are not effective. They're not efficacious. They might cause some kind of a side effect. So that is the importance of research. Again, looking at vaccines, look at the list over here. Right now there are 9 to 10 top contenders in the vaccine area. You probably have heard that only 2, Moderna and Oxford and AstraZeneca, those vaccines, going into phase 2 right now. Nothing is being talked about any other vaccine in a big way, at least in the United States, that they've done. Yes, there are lots of studies that are going on in China, and this list is exhaustive. By the way, these are the 9 top contenders out of 108 to 112 different trials that are going on for vaccines right now in the world. So in the United States, what we were able to see was that, lockdown was very effective, but we relaxed it, and everybody was taking it very easy. And we started seeing numbers of cases go up. We have seen that societal measures were important, were initially very good, but people just got tired of it. And it's not just the United States. The same thing happened in Pakistan. We've seen that testing is not being done in the appropriate way that should be done. The minimum requirement is that less than 10% of the people who are tested are positive for COVID-19. And once you start seeing the numbers go up, you are in big trouble. Right now, for example, in Dade County in Florida, 35% of the people that are being tested are COVID positive. So that is a really bad thing. And the same thing in Texas. In Pakistan, one of the critical things that has to be done is, and one of the surprising things for me was that the testing started going down and the number of cases started going down. Testing should continue to go up. And then you have to measure what is the percent of people that are coming to you are testing positive. The number should be 10% or less. That is success. You've got to get it down to 2 to 6%. My friends, and I tell you with 100% confidence, this virus is still in Pakistan. This virus is still in the world. We have not defeated the virus. And if you want to, if you don't believe me, take a look at what is going on in Australia and New Zealand right now, where the numbers had gone all the way down, and now it's winter over there, and the virus is resurging again. So you've got to develop a very, very, very robust surveillance system over there. One of the critical things that we've understood through research is, and this came out of Johns Hopkins and various other institutions, that 30 contact traces are needed for 100,000 people, because otherwise you just cannot get the work done. And you've got to do it quickly. You've got to utilize other technologies such as smart technologies, apps, but not everybody's going to use it, but that is something important. Therapeutics, what do we have right now? We only have remdesivir, that is in IV format, and that can be given to people who are in intensive care units. We've got plasmapheresis, and that is also for the ICU patients. So for somebody who has moderate disease or mild disease, initially, there's nothing you can do. And the only thing you can do is protect yourself, wear the mask, do the social distancing, and wash your hands. In terms of vaccines, well, vaccines, I honestly don't think will be here, although we are going forward with a lot of things. But you remember one thing in vaccines, and I developed vaccines most of my life. It took us longer than, 5 to 10 years to develop a vaccine. This time around, because of all the money that is being put into it, all the early information that we got, as well as the studies that were done for vaccines for SARS and MERS, and influenza, obviously, we were ahead of the curve in terms of moving very rapidly. But still, it will take a long time to develop the vaccine. It is not going to be next year. Middle of next year, we should have something, hopefully, and I'd be very happy if it's 50% efficacious, but that is not going to be the thing that is going to save lives. Facts that we want to consider is, while lockdown, shelter, and societal measures have helped slow down the spread of virus, we still need to be at par, again, in Pakistan, United States, any place in the world, in UK, doesn't matter where you are. I still believe that testing, tracking, and tracing is important. You cannot be relaxed, okay? You have to worry about the second wave and how you're going to stop that and how you're going to deal with that, because we are not going to be immune by that. We won't have enough herd immunity, and we won't have a therapeutic or a vaccine for next year to be able to deal with it. So people have asked me this question: are we going to have this disease next year? Well, let me quote Dr. Anthony Fauci. I'm almost certain it will come back because the virus is so transmissible and it's globally spread. Americans could be in for a bad fall and a bad winter if the country is unprepared. I think the same holds true for any other country in the world, including Pakistan. The second wave, I believe, I cannot make a sweeping statement that it'll happen, but I believe it will come. I think it might be worse than the first wave. What we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we are prepared for it in all ways. If we do not have a vaccine or a therapeutic, what is it that we are going to do? We've got to be ready for it. And, I'm not going to go through all of that, but in the United States, at least, we are worried about a very bad influenza season this year. We have looked at some of the data and some of the new influenza strains that are appearing in China. And if that strain circulates the world, it will be extremely devastating, because it's a very deadly strain that has been detected in China right now. So some experts have looked at this and said, okay, there could be 3 types of scenarios. One is small waves will continue, like what we've seen with MERS, and then it will be a second. The scenario 2 is the history of redux, and we've got this huge wave, and then it goes away, and then we have multiple waves. Or we will have a third type of a scenario, that the disease comes every single year and then goes down and has some sustainability during summer, but it goes up and goes down again, like influenza. And unlike influenza, it does cause a lot more deaths. Although influenza does cause a lot of deaths also. But this is a problem that we might have to face for a long time, at least for the next 3 years to 4 years. So how are you going to be prepared? Remaining diligent about practice with social distancing and hand washing. And I'm so happy that when I was looking at all the participants, everybody was wearing a mask. And I was really amazed and impressed by that. And thank you for doing that, because what you're doing is you're not just saving yourself. And this is evidence that we have seen and clearly seen that in the United States, if masking was not done, we would have had 40,000 more deaths at least in the past few months. So it is a very important thing to do. You've got to increase the testing, you've got to enhance tracking, and you've got to do all sorts of things in terms of making sure that, and I'm really, I've been working with a lot of people in Pakistan, and one of the, honestly, I'm amazed at the technology that has evolved, and the masks that are being produced over there, the PPE that is being produced over there. So that is just incredible. What we've got to do in Pakistan is to work on other technologies, science-based technologies, so Pakistan is not dependent upon other countries to provide them with reagents, with kits for PCR and testing, and have equipment that can analyze those tests themselves. Obviously, one of the important things that I've always pushed in Pakistan is we've got to develop institutions where we can develop vaccines and drugs, so that Pakistan does not have to depend upon other countries to provide them with that, because right now Pakistan doesn't have the capacity to do that. So let's build the national public health infrastructure to ensure that the capacity to deal with any problem, not just COVID, and to stay, so that things stay in a contained mode. So thank you so much, and that's my last slide, and I appreciate your time, and hopefully you have a lot of questions, because that's what we really want to hear from you, and be able to have an interactive discussion with you. Thank you.
Dr. Shani, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking discussion. So I'm just, as you know, that we have curated a few questions for both speakers. So before we open the floor, I will be putting forward a couple of questions to each of you. And then, once we have dealt with some of these, then we'll open the floor. We'll probably won't have too much time to have this sort of a more curated discussion. But Dr. Chotani, what I just want to touch upon was, obviously there is a debate between how many number of tests have been currently conducted in Pakistan. And obviously we all being worried that perhaps the test numbers have gone down, and therefore the number of cases which are coming to light are less because of the number of cases we are not testing enough. But the proponents of the other theory is that the positive rate is also coming down. So what I wanted to ask was, is it robust enough to just look at the rate of positivity of the number of tests being carried out versus the total number of tests? And can we derive the inference that, in fact, yes, the disease to a certain extent is receding in Pakistan, because the rate of positive tests, although the number of tests are being reduced, are coming down? Is that a reasonable inference, or is it flawed? Thank you.
So it's a reasonable inference to a point, right? And one of the important things that you have to understand, and from an epidemiological perspective, what we have to understand is, where are those tests being done? So hypothetically speaking, if they are being done in, whether they're being done in a rural area or an urban area, how is the distribution of these tests if the numbers have gone down? Have the numbers just gone down in the rural areas, or have the numbers just gone down in the urban areas? What is happening? Why have the numbers gone down? Why should we decrease the number of testing if we feel very confident that the number of cases, the positivity is going down? And to be honest about it, if you do small number of cases and the positivity is going down, it's a good story. It's not a bad story. But I still feel very, I'm a little worried that, we are just going to say, okay, fine, we're doing small number of cases in certain areas where we have control over the disease, and that happens. And you can see United States, right? And you can see different states, and each state is acting in a very different way. Each geographic area is acting in a very different way. Each county is acting in a very different way. So we've got to have some measure of how this testing is being done to generalize from an epidemiological perspective if it is being done in a valid way. Number one, yes, if it is done in a valid way, then we are doing good. But I would still encourage more testing, and more testing, as much testing as possible, and doing the right testing, not the testing that has not been approved by clearly world organizations like UK, unfortunately, Pakistan doesn't. I wish Pakistan had an FDA, which was very, very, very stringent in terms of their policies. We just don't have it. So let's follow something where, from outside and take a look at which are the appropriate tests. Are we really using the right test? By the way, PCR, for all, throughout my life at least, I thought PCR was the gold standard, was 100% accurate, right? But what I've realized, and what research has now demonstrated, that PCR is not 100% accurate either. You've got to have the clinical backbone. You've got to do the clinical thing in order to be able to understand what's happening with the disease. Because of the technique itself, it is 66% accurate based upon a lot of different studies. Maybe it's 70%, maybe it's 80%, but its efficacy goes down as the disease progresses over days and weeks. So we've got to take a look at all of those scenarios and be able to understand exactly what's going on. But I believe testing needs to be, we need to continue doing the testing, as much testing as possible, irrespective of if we are seeing less number of cases. And I'm really happy to see less number of cases, but let's not stop testing.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Khurram Khan, I've got a question. Obviously, in the COVID era, and a huge amount of social media presence, anybody of any stature can contribute whatever knowledge they have very widely. So and it's open for both the speakers really, but if Khurram can reflect on it first, how should physicians behave in such an environment where there is so much information available and some of which is not true? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And this highlights the biggest challenge that we are facing in the social media era anyways. I mean, COVID is obviously itself, it has presented as a crisis. But if you look at the presence of social media in last 5 years, it has overall transformed our way of thinking and our life dramatically. I think that's why I thought, obviously Dr. Chotani has given an excellent presentation on what the facts and figures are. And my part was to initially actually introduce this, concept in the mind that how you, even if you get information from journals, latter part coming from social media alone, you critically analyze that. So when obviously you're seeing something on the social media, it's not necessary that it's all irrelevant information. I mean, we are using today social media as a platform for people to have an understanding about research and the methodologies as well. So I think it's, again, even when you're looking at the social media, you need to see who they're listening to, what evidence is being presented, and what is the impact of that on our clinical practice. So those are 2 or 3 baseline principles that I would encourage everyone to follow. And then the second step is actually, even if it is, so we've seen, I mean, President Trump came up with sweeping statements about different drugs, and he is the president of United States of America. So you have to still take it with a pinch of salt and go back and look at the evidence, particularly if you are a physician. You have this ability to critically analyze any information coming from anybody's mouth, even if it is Dr. Fauci or the world leading experts. Find there are certain things which become part of the practice. And yes, it's not necessary to go back on everything and recheck, but this is again at the tip of our hands. Google search is at the tip of our hands. So really, you can find out papers, you can find out literature being published and the practices. One final point I would make is that we need to be able to distinguish things which are done within the context of clinical trials versus things which are done clinically. And I've seen this is where the biggest issue lied in Pakistan. So, I've been contacted myself, and I'm sure many of you have been contacted about, drugs which were sold really expensively in Pakistan, even the plasma therapy and everything, which is absolutely justifiable within the context of trials, because you have to have a way of evaluating their efficacy and their tolerability. But it's not justifiable at all when you find them being sold over the counter.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do you have any thoughts on how best to manage this social media information storm for physicians?
So I think Dr. Khurram Khan, nailed it. and you know, there's very little that I can add, but one of the things that I have observed, not just in Pakistan, but in the United States, that people, and especially in Pakistan, and there are a lot of Pakistanis who are listening to me. And one of the things that I have observed is that in Pakistani medical journals, when an article is published, there are no questions that are asked. Are people really reading those articles? On the other hand, you know, the other, you know, European or US medical journals, when an article is written, a lot of people will ask a question, and those questions are, you know, published, and the author has to answer those questions, right? So is it that we are reading or we are not reading? I was with a very prominent professor at University of Pittsburgh, who's my mentor, Dr. Ronald Laporte, and I was talking to him recently, and he said, listen, I've stopped writing papers. And the reason I stopped writing papers was, you know, people were just not reading them. And what I've done is I've come up with a new way of, you know, compiling data and using social media to disseminate the information. And he's started this thing, and I worked with him on this thing called the Super Course, where lectures are posted, and you can go and find lectures on anything that you want to from very, very good academics around the world. So social media has a very important role, because now, you know, people are looking at social media more than anything else. They're getting more information from it than any other place, even physicians, right? So one of the most important things that we all have to understand is that you individually are responsible for understanding, appreciating, comprehending, and deciphering the information that you're receiving from all different sources. You've got to think about it a little bit. Who is this person who's saying that, you know, just go and drink this type of water and you're going to get better? I mean, are there any studies, like Dr. Khan has said, are there any studies that are showing that? I mean, is there any evidence that that works? Or it's just, you know, somebody's saying, you know, do this, do this, do this. You've got to have evidence-based stuff. And that is what you've got to do as individuals, as researchers, as physicians, as public health individuals, and students in Pakistan, to be able to understand and appreciate what it is that you are trying to address. What is the question? What is the hypothesis? What is the potential answer to that question? And you know, just don't take it lightly, because we are talking about human lives over here. We're not just talking about numbers. We are trying to save human lives, and that is the mission that we are on, and that's why we are in this field, right? So
Yeah.
individual responsibility is critical, whether you do social media or you do peer review, literature review, right? So those are important things.
Sure. Thank you very much. I think the take-home message for everybody listening is to take information, whatever channel is coming through the stringent process of, you know, processing your information and sort of grading it in your own mind, you know, how relevant this, you know, regardless of who, you know, or which channel is coming through. So thank you very much. I've got a question, in fact, being put through by Dr. Yusuf Ali, who's the facility manager for the COVID-19 hospital in Peshawar. And I think he's also affiliated with the Medical Emergency and Resilience Foundation. And his question is that, and that's for Dr. Chotani, besides clinical research, what about research in the management aspects of public health with regards to COVID? Management has been very difficult these days. There are new challenges and frequent changes in strategies and operations. Can you please highlight role of legacy planning, COVID-19 specialized hospital in developing countries like Pakistan?
Very important question, and a very critical question, because this disease has shown us things that we had not seen before. And things are evolving. Even in the United States, things have evolved. The entire last week, I was working on putting together a proposal to Hidalgo County in Texas, where right now individuals have to wait to get into an ICU bed because there are no beds available, and somebody dies. that is the only way they can get into an ICU bed. So management in all regards has become a very difficult thing during this dilemma. And what do you do when you have situations like this? Well, my job is to go and build a hospital, a 100-bed hospital over there, to be able to take on those particular patients. And again, in COVID, what is happening right now is it's an evolving, really, in all honesty, like the research that we are doing in terms of understanding the disease, the management of this particular problem, and the management of the hospitals, management of everything that we are doing has become a dilemma and a learning process. So, everything that we had learned in terms of moving a patient and taking this much time from, coming into the door to the emergency room, to going to a bed, to going to potentially, if need to be in ICU, having a ventilator ready for them, all of those equations have been thrown away because of the large number of patients that have shown up. So what I would appreciate if you do is, right now, how I learn is I am looking at different countries, different hospitals, different areas where they've had these problems. And there's a lot of material that people are writing about this. You've got to research that. You can touch base with me, and we can have a detailed discussion on this thing, and we can actually come up, and I can help you whatever you need with in terms of putting together some kind of a strategic plan, management legacy plan for your hospital. And we can have a debate on this thing. And my number and my email address is provided, so please do touch base with me on that. Dr. Khan, do you have any suggestions?
No, I think you've covered it extremely well, and this is.
I mean, talk about your experience in UK as to what happened, with all the management that we were, experts in, and then all of a sudden this disease hit us, and what.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think this is a great teacher in some ways, this crisis as well, because NHS itself was claimed to be one of the best, if not the best systems in the world. And the real beauty of NHS in general is that you have actually a system which provides care at each level, even if it be the smallest town or the biggest city in the UK. But every single NHS institute was hit by this crisis, to the point. I was actually, I wrote an article on that as well, and we have an estimated 20% increase in cancer mortality as a result of COVID crisis, because there was a 60% reduction in referrals from the primary care to the tertiary care for processing, the new cases of cancer. So it's a big crisis that not just COVID has created from its own perspective, but also for other healthcare services. So I think, I completely agree. I think, again, the general point is about collaboration and, using the experience of other nations who have been through this crisis. And I think in some ways, actually, we were lucky in Pakistan in that sense that, the crisis came 3 months later than it did in Europe and USA. So there was some scope of learning from that. And, people were already using some precautionary measures, and it was helping, obviously, the healthcare system. But we also know that there are challenges in healthcare system in Pakistan. So, as I'm also available for any form of collaboration or, teaching or whatever we can contribute in our capacity through this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A couple of questions which has popped through, which I think we might as well take while we are in the stride. One of them is there a permanent solution for stopping the spread of COVID-19? I don't think that there is, in fact. So I think Dr. Chotani has already covered that, this is going to be here for at least medium term. There is another question. Is it really necessary to test healthcare professionals for every 15 days? I think that is probably a practice which the person who has asked this question has come across in their own institution. Is there any evidence based to this by any chance? Have you got any information around, whether we really need to test every healthcare professional every 15 days?
Yeah, I think, I'll just briefly address that, and then evidence, actually, Dr. Chotani will probably be able to share his experience as well. I think, look, there are two elements to that. One is actually the ability to test, which is, that how much capacity you have in terms of building the testing capacity. So, and the second element is whether there is evidence to it or not. So I'll answer the second part first. So we cannot have evidence. Look, I mean, the whole crisis started just 6 months, 7 months ago. And we are only learning about the crisis. So there will always be, as I said in the beginning of my talk as well, that yes, you need to rely on evidence, but evidence needs to be assessed in a particular perspective, so there are expert opinions which are required. There are strategic policies as well, which actually vary from place to place. So for example, again, it's relevant to my practice. So what UK has done in last 2 months is that in most of the cancer centers, they're trying to ensure that the practice is actually COVID free completely. And this is relevant because obviously we treat patients who are highly immunosuppressed because of cancer therapies, anti-cancer therapies. And it is important to ensure that then cancer, which I think is another pandemic, does not hit us as hard as it has at this point. So I think it will need to be, the testing capacity needs to be assessed individually in that place, first of all. And frequent testing, I don't see has a harm, because in the end, healthcare professionals are the ones who would be possibly seeing 20, 30, 40, whatever, depending on your hospital patients per day. So if one person is infected, then he's infecting 40 other people as well who are already in the hospital for some reasons, obviously. So there is an element of spreading that virus. So I don't see it as a problem, but I think it needs to be carefully assessed rather than coming with just a random number. I don't think that 15 as a random number, it has been used anywhere. But for example, in our center, they use it, before and entrance of every patient for chemotherapy. They test it 2 days before that. So, and I'll leave it with Dr. Chotani, actually, if there is any evidence to the 15-day number as such.
So as Dr. Khan has said, you need longitudinal data to be able to assess if this practice is efficacious or effective, right? We don't have that luxury right now. But what we know is that healthcare providers, as Dr. Khan has said, are at very high risk in terms of exposure. We, and I personally, from a healthcare perspective, feel very, very, very strongly that healthcare providers should be protected because they are the first line of defense, right? I was, every night there are people physicians from across the nation in the United States that we all congregate and have this is like a support group. Honestly, you guys should have a support group, the people that are working intensively on that. And, there are some physicians who are so exhausted and so tired. And, there are some who cry literally. I mean, these are adult men, women who literally break up and cry because they're seeing so many deaths and they just cannot deal with it. It is difficult. It's not that they're weak, they're very strong, but they need an outlet at the end of the day. So you got to have an outlet, my friends. But one of the most important things is that we've got to make sure that we are all safe. And for that, in terms of exposure, first of all, you got to have the PPE, right? You got to do the masking, you got to do the face shield, you got to do the gloves, you got to do the hand sanitization. You cannot do social distancing. Those are the things that you got to do. You got to watch for symptoms. You know that a lot of people get the disease who are asymptomatic. So now if you get the disease and you're asymptomatic, you might be transmitting it to other people. So do wear a mask and all that. I believe the 15-day number has come due to the quarantining that is being done for about 15 to 16 days, the 2-week quarantining period. So, that is somehow being used for this. There's no real evidence of, that number, but I think it's not, if the testing is available, like Dr. Khan has said, if you have the capacity, please go ahead and test it. Do the testing, because we want you to be safe. We want you to be taking care of patients. We don't want you to take the disease back home and infect your family members. And one of the most important things that we have to understand and appreciate over here is, and this is an experience that I want to share from the United States that somehow reflects and equates in Pakistan. So there are counties, there are states, there are ethnicities that live in different type of households, right? The Caucasian households are usually very small. They do not have a mother or a grandmother or kids living over there. The Pakistani households are generational households. Even in the United States, the Latino or people who came from South America are multi-generational households. African American households are also multi-generational in a lot of cases, and they are very tight because they live in a very low socioeconomic area. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So and they do different types of work and they're essential workers that they have to go out and work all the time. So that's why we see the disease high in those ethnicities compared to other ethnicities, and the death rate higher in them compared to others. In Pakistan, we all live in a multi-generational, a lot of people still live in a multi-generational household where you have your grandmother, your mother, your father, yourself, your wife, your children, right? 3 or 4 generations living together. So you don't want to take the disease back home. That's the bottom line. So say, protect yourself. And if testing is available, if there is capacity, do it. Nothing, but there are no laws about the 15-day. There's no 15-day rule over here.
Sure. I may have to reboot my system. Can I just give you a question, Dr. Chutani? I'll be offline for a couple of minutes, but if you can address that question, and towards the end, I'll be back on. And the question is, if somebody has been infected with COVID-19, is there enough evidence that they can have a recurrent infection? And that is one question. The second thing is that, again, the question has popped up, is there, the graph is going down. Is that a good thing in the context of total positive cases? Well, I think we have addressed that, but if you can reflect, both of you, on, is there an evidence for that the patient can be reinfected after having an infection? And I'll be back online shortly. Thanks.
So it's a very important question and a very, very critical question from an immunity perspective. Initial studies, which came out a few months ago from China, clearly demonstrated that there were people who were getting reinfected with the virus. We have not yet seen any conclusive studies in the United States or from Europe that have, suggested that. And Dr. Khan, if you're aware of any of those, please do let us know. One of the critical things that now is emerging is the hypotheses, which is not proven because we need longitudinal data, right, to be able to understand and appreciate what is going on. So I showed you that particular graph of IgG and IgM, immunoglobulin M and immunoglobulin G. And traditionally, what we understand from immunology is that once you develop IgG, that means that you now have the strong antibodies in your body and you have long-term immunity against a particular virus. That means that you've developed the arsenal that you need in your body to fight that virus. What we are seeing, and still is anecdotal information, not conclusive information, that after a few months of acquiring the disease, IgG disappears. And we still are looking at that data and trying to understand it. So we don't know, to be very honest about it, in that regard. Are you going to get the disease again once? Because, we've seen that with vaccines, right? That's why we have booster doses for a lot of these vaccines, because the immunity lasts for X number of years and then it drops out. And then you got to get the vaccine, you got to get a booster shot again to create that immunity. But that usually lasts for years. And that is what I have to tell you right now at this particular juncture in time, what I know and what I believe we know about this particular question. Dr. Khan, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think, you've addressed it beautifully, actually. But I think a couple of things, there are two elements to that. Obviously, one is the testing itself. So what is the sensitivity and specificity of different kits being available? The second element is the immunity that you've touched upon. So I'll start off with the personal experience, actually. So having had this infection in March, my antibody test came back negative in late June. And initially, I thought that that was a problem with the test, but then I realized that a lot of my colleagues who had the infection in March had negative tests. And then this was strengthened by the fact that actually a study from King's College London came out just last week. And it showed that when they did testing in March in the high risk areas in UK, so for example, certain hotspots in London and other areas, the presence of antibody was nearly 60%. And now they've repeated the test 3 months later, and the presence of antibody is 17%. So which does suggest, obviously, these are not the same individuals, so there is some element of bias, but nevertheless, what it shows is that, you know, there is a drop in the antibody. And I think the conclusion from that paper was that actually, if you have more longitudinal data 6 months later, maybe that will drop even further. So even if you have some form of immunity, it does sound at this point of time that that probably is short-lived, possibly. I mean, obviously we can't say it with certainty. Now, the second element to that is the published evidence. And as you mentioned earlier, the Chinese data suggested that there's 19% risk of reinfection, which is quite significant, given that that paper actually, if I recall correctly, came in March. And so again, this was from roughly December, January to March, 3 months time period. And there were already nearly 1/5 of the patients which had presented again with reinfection. So I think, I mean, we have to say that obviously there will be more complicated factors there in terms of your own immunity, which varies from individual to individual. You know, how robust is your immune system in terms of building up those antibodies. We know from our experience of, for example, hepatitis B vaccination even, that with vaccination, some people require further boosters because their antibodies drop over a period of time. So there will be many different factors to that. But I think in conclusion, I do think that there is a risk of infection. And this is particularly important from the point of view of the healthcare professionals, as we keep emphasizing that, you know, you are actually being exposed to the highest number of viruses. Again, this theory about, you know, viral load is important one as well, because of your exposure. We know that all over the world, actually, if you look at the death rate of younger patient population, a lot of doctors and healthcare professionals have unfortunately succumbed to this disease. And part of that, the hypothesis behind is that they are actually exposed to more number of patients with viruses, thus have a higher viral load.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very final question from the written question, then we'll open the floor. The question is that there is some suggestion that the immunity gained by infection it does not last for more than 1 to 4 months. Now, would you want to reflect on this? You know, how robust that data is? Are we still learning, or is it very likely that the initial information which has become available, i.e., the immunity is not going to last for too long and could be in weeks or months? Correct.
I think this is
talked
exactly
about it already. So I think you were online and you dropped off for a little bit. I think we discussed that particular question.
Thank you very much for pointing that out. Okay. So I'm just going to check if there's anything more relevant. I don't think there's anything. I think there are comments. So I think it probably will be now time to open the floor for some live questions. So if somebody would want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself, please, and ask the question for the relevant speaker. Thank you.
Did you tell him that there was a reward for asking the first question?
Yes, there is a small reward actually for taking the initiative. So any questions from the audience? I would say.
Hello. Yes, Assalamu alaikum.
She gets the award. You got to tell her that.
Yeah.
So if can you please introduce
Yes.
Can you please introduce yourself and your affiliations, please? Thank you.
Yes. I am Dr. Fawzia Farah. and I have been working as a general practitioner in ZMT Clinic Network, Pakistan. I have seen so many cases. Dr. Khurram is here, and we have got a nice talk with Dr. Chitani and Dr. Khurram. I have seen emergence of lymphoproliferative disorder during COVID-19. And actually, my mother passed away from lymphoproliferative disorder, number one. And I have seen the emergence cases of Hodgkin lymphoma and non-Hodgkin lymphoma during this period. The second thing is that we have been educating as healthcare workers ourselves, but I am watching the people over here is what actually is the denial. What actually I call it as denial. So I think if people should be more aware of the fact that what is being going on, because practically Eid al-Azha is coming, and that can be the source of second wave here in Pakistan. So I want to have the comment from both the speakers on it. Thank you.
Or if Dr. Yeah.
I'm
I think
Professor Dr. Fikadani. I've got a couple of quick questions from Dr. Chitani. One is about are these antibodies which we are detecting, are these neutralizing antibodies? Number two is the role of the antigen tests which are recently been approved by FDA under emergency use authorization. Particularly for the healthcare workers, if they start their day and the test is done beforehand, so that they can safely continue their work.
Excellent. So let's go to Dr. Farah's question first, and then we'll come to you, Dr. Kayani. Thank you for those questions.
Okay, so the question about lymphoproliferative disorders or any other cancers, actually, I think I highlighted earlier in my talk and during the discussion that one of the biggest pandemics in parallel is cancer itself, whether it be solid malignancies or lymphoproliferative or hematological malignancies. So what has happened, actually, I don't think there is a cause-effect relationship with COVID-19. I don't think so, because I've myself looked at the data from good 180 patients. So we had a cohort of cancer diagnosed patients, including hematological malignancies and patients without history of cancer, and their outcomes were not dramatically different. Mortality and other parameters were really identical to each other. I think what has happened, though, is that with cancer, one of the keys we all know is early presentation and early diagnosis. So unfortunately, during the lockdown, a lot of patients have preferred to stay at home, of course. So what has happened now is that 3 months later, these patients are coming out with the diagnosis at more advanced stages. And of course, those patients who are on chemotherapy are at a slightly increased risk of contracting the virus, if not have the bad outcomes. Because the bad outcomes, I think, my hypothesis is, are neutralized by the fact that a lot of these patients are already immunocompromised. Sorry. So, and we know that the one of the mechanisms of worsening disease from mild to severe disease is actually hyperimmune response. So therefore, I think probably that is, in a way, is a blessing in disguise for these patients. And you can see a lot of drugs which are used in severe condition, in fact, are immunosuppressive drugs. So I think in conclusion, what I would say is that I don't think there's a cause-effect relationship. The second element that you mentioned was about the denial. And I agree that there is a strong element in our society who still believe that the virus is either, a sazish, or, people and the medics actually are making up those cases. And, I saw, unfortunately, there were attacks on hospitals. And people still, there is a strong segment of our society who does not believe in the virus itself. or at least the mortality from the virus. They attribute it to diabetes and other things. And we all are trying to educate them as much as possible. I think, I mean, one has to say that, you know, unfortunately, those things are prevalent in our society, and we have to live with that and try to educate people as much as possible. There is no other alternative.
So yes, I agree 100% with you, Dr. Khan. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, the problem with these I mean, everybody that has cancer is at high risk at above the age of 60 from a COVID perspective. And the quality of care has been impaired for all these patients during the COVID crisis. Either they were afraid of going to a physician, or the physicians were not accepting, or hospitals were not accepting those patients to be taken care of. Thus, there has been negligence in care, and that has caused a serious problem, not just with cancers. You know, more people are dying of heart attacks because they are just afraid of going and dealing with this problem, going to a hospital. They're ignoring it. In terms of denial, yes, that's a critical problem, and we are seeing that in Pakistan with Eid al-Adha approaching. One of the big things is going to be a lot of social gatherings. People are not going to be observing any type of social distancing. Nobody is, hopefully people are going to be wearing masks, but I don't think that's going to happen. They're going to be hugging each other. They're going to be congregating in large numbers at masajids. And this is what we saw in the United States after 4th of July, Memorial Day weekend, and during the protests that were after Mr. Floyd's death, the race riots that we've had over here. And then after the political gatherings, that campaign gatherings that were happening. After each of them, 2 weeks later, we've seen surges of cases. And then 2 weeks after that, we've seen surge in the deaths. So during this Eid period, I think we've got to be very careful in Pakistan. You know, to be honest about it, everything is going to remain the same. Be cautious and take all the precautions, because if not they're not taken, like what happened. If you just look at what happened after Eid.
Mr. Chutani, I'm going to mute everybody. Can you please unmute yourself, because there is a lot of interference. Thank you. Can you please unmute yourself? Thank you. Can you please continue? Yeah.
Yeah. So just like what happened after, you know, Eid al-Fitr, right? Few days before Eid al-Fitr, the lockdown was eased up. People were jamming the markets. They were not observing any type of precaution. Nobody was wearing a mask. And 2 weeks after that, you started seeing increased number of cases, increased number of deaths later on. So that is the problem. And this problem might happen again if things are not being checked properly and precautions are not taken properly. So I would say, I suggest that we take precautions. Now I'll get to the next question, and that was the question from Dr. Kayani. And Dr. Kayani asked about the antigen test that is now has been approved by the FDA. Dr. Kayani, one of the biggest problems that we have is that, yes, the test has been approved, but it is not widely available as yet. One of the things that we have to consider is how Pakistan is going to ascertain that test, at the same time be able to afford that test. Those are the critical problems that we are facing in the United States. So I believe Pakistan will face that also. I hope, and my sincere hope is, in the next few months, we will have multiple antigen tests, and the price of this is going to go down. And then hopefully, what happened with Gilead, which produced remdesivir, and then gave the license to produce the same drug to Firozan in Pakistan at a much lower cost than what is cost we pay in the United States. If something like that would happen, and I'm working very closely with the U.S. State Department in terms of making sure that anything that comes out, and if there are and the pharmaceutical company that comes out with, if somehow we can transfer that technology to Pakistan in a way that the price goes down, and they're doing it at a not-profit model, then Pakistan can definitely benefit. But just make sure that we're not using any antigen test that is coming out, because believe it or not, in about a few months or maybe a few weeks, a lot of different antigen tests will emerge in Pakistan claiming to be FDA approved. So be very cautious of that, sir.
Thank you very much for a very exhaustive answer. I'm just going to pitch this question from the Facebook page, and it's just to make sure that we've got people participating from that forum as well. This is Arshad Latif, and the question, obviously, it's a multiple choice question. You can pick and choose. The question is, what's in your opinion is the single most important reason for the non-existence of, or rather, okay, let's be a bit kind, sparsely practiced evidence-based medicine in Pakistan? And the options he has given is it lack of central authority overseeing research and guidelines, pharmacies being able to prescribe medications without doctors authorizing the treatment, or number 3, lack of governance at a government level, and may I add, number 4, all of the above? Thank you.
For me, it's all of the above.
Yeah.
I can add a few more things to it, but it is all of the above.
What would you rate the most? Is it, governance?
I got to ask Dr. Khan, is it all of the above?
I think what is missing here is probably the topmost reason, which is actually the lack of insight and education of that. I mean, all those factors are obviously relevant. And I always keep saying this, that, Dr. Chotani would have probably experienced the same, but I have personally experienced that I started off, as a not as a very bright student, just as a good student. And then I realized that, there are things that you need to learn yourself in order to, and I'm not being critical here. I think it's a constructive forum. So honestly, I'm trying to be as constructive as possible. So, the key is when you start the accountability, it starts from yourself. And then comes anybody else, actually. And yes, there are lack of resources. There are, there are no regulatory bodies. The educational institutes are not as well equipped as they are in Europe and USA. But still, I have to tell you that, we all, I graduated from Pakistan and I came here and I was comfortable in achieving what I had to achieve. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that start from yourself, examine the evidence. That's why I was saying that if you are able to yourself start the examination and start contributing, so at least from the point of view of the retrospective studies, good quality experiences, large cohort studies, and then comes a point where you will be able to engage with the pharma and industry, and you will be able to hopefully contribute further. So all of the above plus this one, I think.
Absolutely right. I think you hit the nail right on right on the head. One of the things that I have noticed, and I also belong to APNA, which is the North American Pakistani Physician Organization, is that graduates come from Pakistan, except a couple universities. Let me put it this way, and I'm not going to name those universities. Majority of the students that come here, they come to take USMLE Part 1, Part 2 are boards essentially, and they don't know what to do. And while I was at Hopkins and various other institutions, what we decided amongst a few people, and one of my colleagues is, I believe, in Pakistan now. I think she's with Gates Foundation, Anita Zadi, Dr. Anita Zadi at the AKU, and Dr. Adil Butt, who's in US and as well as Qatar. Was that what we would do is we would have a postdoc fellowship and bring students into our institutions and teach them epidemiology and basic stuff in terms of research. When we asked people, students who came from Pakistan, what do you think research is? One of the heartbreaking things for me to understand and appreciate was research was considered the bottom of medicine. In Europe and in the United States, it's considered the top of medicine. The respect that you get when you do research and you are educating people is the highest. So the roles are essentially reversed. So research is not considered a very good thing, and it's considered to be for people who are not able to practice medicine, which is unfortunate in Pakistan. First of all, that paradigm has to shift. What we are doing in the United States from APNA right now is every year I host a 2-day, once at the annual conference, and unfortunately this year I couldn't do it because of COVID and our conference was canceled, a 2-day seminar where I invite people from multiple institutions from United States, have about 100 to 200 people packed in a room for 2 days, 8 hours a day. I give them breakfast and I give them lunch, and then they can go out and do whatever they want. But, and they stay, honestly, they stay. And we teach them what are the basic principles of epidemiology, because they're not aware of it, unfortunately, and the basic principles of biostatistics. We teach them a very simple language, and the software is available free online at CDC. It's called R. It's a statistical package. We give them that package, and then we teach them how to use that package. And in 2 days, in 16 hours, we can actually teach them how to understand and appreciate and come up with a sample size, the basic principles of it, what is confidence interval, and how to calculate all of that stuff, because there are softwares that can do it, and we make them use that software. One of the things that I would appreciate, and if anything comes out of it, and Dr. Khan, you have really expressed something very, very close to my heart, and it's so important for Pakistan that people learn, and you don't have to spend 7 years coming out from Pakistan, going to UK to learn about that thing, for crying out loud. In Pakistan, they should learn all those things in the medical school, like what happens in the United States. We've got to have institutions that are really focused on that, and people who are doing research, people who are doing academic work are respected and given the fair dues that they require. Otherwise, Pakistan is going to be way behind, which is an unfortunate part for me, because I sit in the United States. I wish I was in Pakistan. You sit in UK. You wish you were in Pakistan. Yeah. If we coming from Pakistan can do all of this in the United States of America.
Thank you very much.
We can do it.
Thanks. I think that was really, I hope everybody who's listening is sort of motivated and by this, and hopefully something good can come out of it. And I'm sure that, via the organization which you belong, and we in the UK, we if we are provided an opportunity, we can definitely try and enhance this this important aspect for our undergraduate students particularly. So I would now ask Shahzeb Dhomki to ask a question, please. If you unmute yourself and ask a question. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, dear sir. I have a question. My name is Shahzeb Dhomki. I am working as a nutrition assistant in PPHI Kashmir. Sir, I have a question that if any malnourished children suspected COVID-19 positive, how can we continue the treatment or isolate the child for a specific time of period? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think this is obviously, it's a very pertinent question. Obviously, it's slightly off topic, so I would not be surprised if the panelists would want to pass it on, and we can, but
I can briefly answer that question. You have a COVID positive patient who's a child who's nutritionally impaired. That child has to be isolated, but the nutritional supplements that the child needs, all the requirements that were supposed to be given to the child, like if you are a cancer patient and you're getting cancer medications, your medications and your support or whatever you're doing should not stop. It should continue, must continue, because otherwise the child is going to be in dire need of help in a few days. Continue what you're doing, making sure that you're protecting yourself while isolating that child and providing all the things that are required.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Absolutely. I think, I'll just very quickly say that, look, when you're dealing with any COVID positive patient, you still have to manage the patient. There are patients who are in ITU, there are patients who have oxygen requirements, and they are at high risk of passing those viruses to the individuals who are looking after them. So the principles exactly remain the same. As long as you're using the required PPE for that purpose, actually, then you should just cater their needs as you would do for any other patient.
Hello.
Yes, can you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
I am Dr. G.M. Dashti, working as a medical officer as a PPHI Jacobabad. Hello.
Yes, can you please also, we can hear you. Can you please ask your question?
my question is that if any patient is suffering from 100% COVID symptoms and he is in critical condition, but when he is tested by COVID by PCR, the result is found negative, although his anti-COVID antibodies are positive. What could be the reason of this pick? Please.
Okay.
So I'll take that question. And we've had multiple patients like that.
I'm going to mute everybody.
In fact,
Hello.
yes. So we got your question, sir.
So Dr. Chotani, I'm going to mute everybody. Can you please unmute yourself and answer the question? Thank you.
Sure, sir. An excellent question, and we've seen that, and I have seen that also. As I've said earlier, PCR can be negative in COVID-19 patients. Multiple PCRs were negative in hospitalized patients that we have observed over here. Antibody test was also negative in some of those patients. It is a very unique problem that we are still learning about. They had all the symptoms of COVID-19. They almost died. They had to be put on a ventilator. They survived. Later on, at some point, they tested positive, or they might test negative. My partner, who I work with, who's a physician, was tested positive with antibody, had all the symptoms. He was negative through PCR, and later on he did become positive on PCR. But as I said, PCR is not 100% test either in terms of the results. The technique matters. Sometimes you miss it. It's a hit and miss thing. You're not able to see where you're putting that Q-tip, right? And that swab in the nasopharyngeal passage. You might miss the spot. Patients are very reluctant to allow you to do all that stuff. It's not an easy thing for the individual to handle. So you can miss it. If the patient is symptomatic, use your clinical judgment, treat that patient the best you can. And I think that is what you've got to do. And rely on the antibody test if it is positive. I wish, I don't know. And that's a question, if somebody can answer. If does Pakistan have in the United States we have it, so I'm sure you have it in Pakistan, serology test for IgG and IgM. I know that IgG is available, but I don't know if IgM is available. Not the rapid test, the serology test where you do a venous puncture, you collect the blood, and you send it to the lab, it's analyzed, and you get titers.
Thank you very much. There was a very similar question from Dr. Samreen from PPHI Tongue, and I think it was to do with the fact that the person who asked the question was themselves symptomatic, but were negative on what I suspect is PCR. So I think that your question is being answered already by Dr. Chotani. So we progress on. I would like Mr. Muhammad Imran from MERF to unmute yourself and ask a question. I think you've put it. I think it'd be best if you ask it yourself. It's a very relevant question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Please, if you can introduce yourself and ask the question. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Muhammad Imran, and I am working as consultant pulmonologist at MERF organization, Peshawar. We have recently started a COVID-specific hospital here.
Sure. Can you please, I think you were asking about dexamethasone already received in the community, and then some rather good effect with methylprednisolone. Can you please elaborate, and then we can get the panelists to...
I have 2 to 3 observations. Like, the recovery trial has suggested dexamethasone, but what we have experienced here in our setup, like when people come to you in a tertiary care unit, they already have used dexamethasone in periphery. And when you start them on methylprednisolone, they responds dramatically. So what I suggest is there any comparative trial of both the drugs like dexamethasone and methylprednisolone? Or maybe there are chances that the response to Dexa in UK is different and the response to Dexa in Pakistan may be different. So this is one question. And second question is, what about this blood group thing and the severity of the disease? Are you people suggesting that should we work on it in future? Like, is there any role of the anti-A antibodies which confer protection of the severity of the disease? Like we have seen the disease is less severe in O positive or O group people. Thank you very much. And thank you for this nice, nice talk. Thank you very much, all of you.
I will ask Dr. Khan to reflect on the first question,
Yeah,
please.
I can take that,
Given your
absolutely.
proximity to the ivory towers of Oxford.
I think the first thing to say is that we have recruited patients into recovery trial as well. Now, look, I mean, the first difference is, as you yourself alluded, that once the recovery trial data came out, and this is exactly about what I was saying earlier. Unfortunately, a lot of people started using steroids in public domain, which I think was a concern anyways, because a lot of people go to hakims and non-traditional medicine where steroids, I suspect, are being used in the community in high amounts regardless. Now, personally, I feel that this was the biggest danger with this whole steroids idea being taken in at a different level in Pakistan, because the issue is that actually at the first level of the disease, if you look at the biology, then you're actually possibly exposing those patients to a higher risk of contracting the virus by suppressing their immunity. Mm-hmm. And if you further look at the data from recovery trial, it's very revealing itself. So there was 17% risk reduction in mortality with a very good hazard ratio in people who were actually in people who were requiring ITU admission. But when you look at the improvement in their outcomes in those patients who just required oxygen, the improvement was just 5%. So you can see that the severity of the disease was reflective of how much you would benefit from the steroids. In other words, again, that cytokine storm theory, that, the more the cytokine storm is in your system, which is when the more severe your disease is, then immunosuppression is probably contributing to the improvement in the outcomes. So yes, I think, if patients who are already exposed to steroids, then possibly there is this, there is this notion that you can probably use higher dose of methylprednisolone, which is obviously a higher dose compared to dexamethasone, which was used just at 6 milligram in recovery trial. And maybe that is possibly contributing to improved outcomes, which you're experiencing. What I would make as the last point is that what I said earlier, I think, the important thing from your point of view would be to actually organize a very good retrospective cohort study and look at those outcomes in a very unbiased and honest fashion. Please exclude your bias altogether. I know your feeling is that it is probably helping, and it probably is helping if that's what you feel. But what you need to be able to do is actually either even if you're seeing patients now, then you can do a very small prospective study as well. Give some patients methylprednisolone, don't give the others, and if you think that it is too strong evidence to, not deny the other patients methylprednisolone, then give all of them, but at least actually summarize your data and ask some independent statistician to look at it so that you can actually demonstrate that those patients definitely benefited from methylprednisolone, because otherwise it is just an observation and it's an anecdotal experience which will mean nothing, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Khan, I think you're absolutely right. What can be done, of course, is that, the main difference why dexamethasone, virgin patients have presented to UK, because there is not as easy availability in the community of these types of drugs. So what can happen, however, is, as Dr. Khan alluded, I think it will be an absolutely brilliant small study in which what you can do is, I'm sure that you will receive some dexamethasone virgin patients, which you can use dexamethasone. So you can compare two different cohorts, and we will all encourage you to do it, and all the best. And if there's any help required, then by all means, you can try and get in touch and we can do what we can. Coming to your second question, Dr. Chotani, do you want to please address that?
So before I address that, one of the big things that happens in Pakistan is, and Dr. Khan, excellent synopsis of what needs to be done. The reason that Pakistani papers don't get accepted is because you don't have patient consent forms signed. So make sure that before you do any of those studies and design those studies and put patients in different arms, you have somebody like Dr. Khan. I'd be more than happy to help you to be able to put together a nice study, and it is something that should be done. I think I encourage Dr. Imran for you to do that if you have a COVID-specific hospital, and but make sure that you boxes and take care of all the things. Now, what was the second question, sir? I lost track of it.
Achha.
The second question was about the various blood groups and the susceptibility of some of the groups to more severe disease and apparent protection afforded by some other groups, like, so what I think the person was alluding to, is there strong evidence, or is it, is still emerging evidence? Should we be looking at it a bit more detail?
Well, I think we should be looking at it in more detail. There's emerging evidence that there are certain blood groups that that have shown to be more at risk compared to others. There are a couple studies that are already out, there is evidence, building evidence right now, but we really need to study more on that. At this particular point, what I think should be done is, you've got to design those studies if you have a lot of patients. I mean, it's a very important thing to understand and appreciate. Not only that, we're still learning, right? But everybody needs to be treated. And, I just do not want people to feel that if you're O positive or O negative, or you're AB or whatever, that you're protected from the virus. No, that's not the case. We're still learning. So, but let's, if you guys have those patients, let's design a study. Let's take a look at that. Let's look at the severity of the disease in those patients. That would be a prospective study, or even a retrospective study. You can do a very good retrospective study if you have a decent sample size to show, the differences between the blood groups and the severity of the disease. And I'm sure Dr. Khan would be more than happy to jump on that and go, wow, that would be, that's a publishable study in a high impact journal, to be very honest about it, if a study is designed well, if you have enough patients already.
Absolutely. I will just add a very quick point, actually, and you've beautifully summarized everything. So I think one request that I would specifically make, which is connected to also what was asked about the social media role, is that Dr. Imran, until you have strong enough evidence, kindly do not disseminate this in the public domain, because as Dr. Chotani very rightly said, the biggest concern is, I've seen it many times actually, somebody said folic acid can prevent actually the virus from transforming from mild to moderate or severe illness. And, I had conversation with them. They were really nice people, actually. It's not that they were trying to fabricate something, but it was only a hypothesis. So I think and we know our public who is already in denial. So we don't want them to believe that if they have O positive, negative group, whatever, then they start believing that actually they have a protection from the virus.
I think we are gradually easing towards the end of this discussion. I'm aware that the midnight oil may run out for Dr. Chotani. I'm aware that it's quite late, but I do thank you.
Over here now.
Yeah, I know. So I mean, thank you very much for all of this. I would like Mr. Wahab Soomro to unmute and please reflect. He wanted to say something towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Najib, Dr. Khurram, and Dr. Chotani for giving us this opportunity to distantly learn about COVID and various aspects of the pandemic, the disease. I personally believe that the best tutor of the 21st century is YouTube and the distant learning such as Zoom and other platforms. Let me introduce myself. If you observe your participants, a significant number of the participants is from PPHI, which is in very remote rural area of Sindh province of Pakistan. PPHI is a not-for-profit organization which has been outsourced almost 60 to 70% of primary healthcare sector by Government of Sindh. We are managing 1,380 health facilities across Sindh in all the districts at this moment. And in near future, hopefully within 1 year, we'll be managing the whole primary sector, remaining 700 health facilities. That is 100% primary sector of Government of Sindh. So thank you once again for giving us this opportunity. And the purpose of this introduction was that in future, if such opportunities, especially in primary healthcare sector arises, we'll welcome you all to give us such links or opportunities, so that I can fulfill my responsibility of imparting training to my team members across. And I have also been a COVID patient recently. I had 13 days of fever, and alhamdulillah, I've recovered well and back in office. And after this, my question with respect to COVID is that my own observation, and also shared by many others, is that once you recover, at least 3 to 6 months, you do feel weaknesses in your body and fatigue. So how far this is true? Has it has been established by the research, and when people ask us about the questions like this, that I'm still feeling a lot of weakness and fatigue, what could be the possibly answer of the healthcare provider? Thank you very much.
I think it's a very important question. Dr. Chudani, do you want to reflect on it?
Yes, I would like to reflect a little bit on that. There are, I'm just going to pull the thread a little bit and talk a little bit about the potential long-term effects of COVID-19. So one of the things that we all understand and appreciate, that it affects different organs in the body. The other thing that we all appreciated is that it affects the nervous system very adversely. We know that it affects the brain. We've had patients with strokes. We know it affects the heart. We know it affects the vessels, because we've seen strokes and pulmonary embolisms and things like that. We know that it affects the kidneys. So it affects the body in a big way. So for the kidney and all that, for intensive care unit patients, we can have dialysis. For heart patients, we have other remedies. But what happens to patients that are, because it does pass the blood-brain barrier. Please do not forget that. That's a very important point. And the other virus that we know that passes the blood-brain barrier, and we deal with it, is varicella. And so one of the problems that we see is that, the patients who go into intensive care unit, they have long-term effects in terms of cognitive effects, in terms of nutrition, in terms of attention deficit, in terms of various other things. It is like post-traumatic disease syndrome. You stay on a ventilator, or you're in the intensive care unit, or you are locked up in a place with COVID-19 for a long period of time, you will have those effects. One of the other things that is, again, not conclusive research, but we have observed, is that a lot of people complain of muscular pain and muscular weakness. And this has been seen with other viruses. Now, when we go back and take a look, again, here is the important things of evidence-based medicine. And here is the importance of reading and learning. We have to go back and take a look at all the case studies and all the research that was done on SARS or MERS coronavirus. And because there were a lot of survivors, and we've got to look at what were the effects, sequelae that they developed after the disease. And we see all of these things happening in those particular patients. So what you're saying in terms of weakness, if you go back and look at the patients who survived SARS in 2003 and MERS, they have complained of this particular problem. A lot of people were not able to go to work after SARS. For 3 to 5 years, they complained of muscle weakness and muscle fatigue. So those are studies that have already been established. We don't know, we have not established those studies with this particular, with COVID-19, but we are just reflecting what we are seeing with the same virus, a little bit different at a different period in time.
Thank you very much. I'm wary of time. So can I ask Dr. Rafiq Khanani to please unmute themselves and ask the question?
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity. In fact, I am professor of microbiology at medical schools, and we teach books of Dr. Chotani to all our students. My couple of quick questions. One is that the virus remain viable, replicable virus remains viable in the body of an individual for 10 to 12 days. Is it correct? Number one. And number two is the antibodies that we are testing, IgG antibodies, are these neutralizing antibodies? And how can we know that these are the neutralizing antibodies? Thank you.
Thank you. That's very good. Dr. Chotani, please, if you can answer the question. Thanks.
I think Khurram has been quiet for a little while. Why don't we let Khurram talk a little bit, and I'll listen, and then maybe I'll add something more.
Okay, so you're sorry for the second question I got, but the first question was, so can you kindly just?
I couldn't hear it either, unfortunately. But the second question was neutralizing antibodies, and I think you can talk about that one.
Does the virus remain viable?
Yes, yes. Okay. So I mean,
individual for 10 to 12 days only.
Sure. I think, I mean, so this is obviously dependent on the severity of the disease. So, you know, for mild to moderate cases, which is about 80% of the patients who recover from, you know, the illness after 10 to 14 days. Actually, one of the policies in UK was quite revealing. So in the beginning, it sounded quite astonishing that we were asked to come back to work if we were symptom free and from day 8 of the diagnosis, which I think was incorrect. But nevertheless, I think there was something behind that. So, you know, the theory is that you contract the virus roughly 3 to 4 days before you present with your first symptom. And I think the theory was that you overall have the virus in your system for about 10 to 12 days, as you're saying. However, it is highly dependent on your symptoms. So if this is only applicable if you're asymptomatic. If you're symptomatic, then clearly the virus is replicating for whatever reasons in your system. We don't understand at this point why certain patients actually have more severe illness compared to others. I mean, there are factors like, you know, illnesses, diabetes, comorbidities, etc. But still, we see that there are patients in their 70s, 80s who have mild illness and they recover. And we see patients who are young and they die from the virus. You know, there are proposed hypotheses, but no definitive evidence or conclusive evidence to that effect. So yes, the answer is yes, by and large, 10 to 12 days, but only in asymptomatic patients. Neutralizing antibodies is a good question. I think, I mean, the evidence thus far does suggest that these are neutralizing antibodies, but again, as we touched upon earlier, the length of the duration of the protection that they offer is short, or it appears to be short. So I think, I mean, in terms of the clinical implications, we go back to what we discussed earlier, which is probably what you want to be able to answer for your patients, that, you know, they still need to exercise absolute degree of precautions, even if they were infected once. And somebody I saw asked a very interesting question, which is somewhat linked, was if, you know, there are some Chinese studies which have shown that if you get infected twice, the second time the infection was even worse. Now, I mean, I don't know whether there would be ever, or there would be possibly some biological evidence why that may happen. I don't know. But I think one thing I would say is, even if you look at the chance effect, you know, so the chances of getting hit, and we use this terminology in cancer as well. So, you know, so if you're unlucky to have an illness more than once, you know, then your chances of being amongst those 20% who had severe illness will automatically become higher. And I think that Dr. Chotani could probably reflect on in terms of epidemiology as well, just purely by, you know, virtue of numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And you answered both of those questions perfectly, my friend. I really don't have anything more to add to it. One of the things that I would like to add is that, as the Chinese study that came out and said that the second time around the disease was more severe in those patients, there's another study that came out that clearly is demonstrated that the patients who got the disease the second time actually were not infectious at all. So we are still learning. So please, hold on to things. One of the things that we all have to appreciate, and at the very beginning of this talk, and Dr. Khan talked about it, that God, I mean, so many papers coming out. The amount of papers that this disease has produced has never been produced in the history of medicine in the short period of time. But again, remember, when you do studies in a short period of time of a disease that you don't know anything about, then a lot of those things are not going to really hold water as you move forward. So important that we did those studies. A lot of people did those studies. It's very critical because we didn't know anything about it. So rather than having 100% solution, you might have a 50% solution, and you might save somebody's life, right? Not all the lives, but 50% of the lives. But now we are learning a lot more, and at this particular point, as the disease, fortunately in Pakistan, based upon the numbers that we are seeing, is going down and is in control, we have time. And one of the things that, again, I need to emphasize on is that we've got to get some really good studies done in Pakistan. You have an opportunity over here to have people from your microbiology institute or your medical schools or all the hospitals that are there to actually come out with some really incredible papers that can be published in some really good medical journals. And that would be good, not just for those individuals, but for the institution and Pakistan itself.
Thank you very much. I think last couple of questions. This is from Murph. Mr. Ehtisham has asked this question. I think what he's trying to ask is, whilst we are focusing on hand hygiene and other things, is the infection, or certainly what I suspect he's asking is the severity of infection, dose dependent? And I think what he's trying to say is it likely to be more severe if the viral load is more? So I think you can pick and choose who would like to answer this, but I don't think that I will be able to adjudicate effectively.
No, that's a tough question, but here is some logic. Okay, first of all, we have a dose response, right? So that's why we've been saying that healthcare workers are at higher risk, because they have much more exposure. You have much more exposure, you're getting more exposed to the virus, that's why you're getting the disease. Now, once the virus is in your body, then it starts replicating. One example, and Dr. Khan can elaborate on that, is specifically when we deal with oncology patients in relation to HIV. You can talk about that. So once you have the virus in your body, and if you are immunocompromised, depending upon the replication, depending upon how much viral load you have in the body, obviously the higher the viral load, the intensity of the disease is going to be higher. We don't have, by the way, I don't know the exact answer to that. I've not read anything about it, and I'll defer it to Dr. Khan. This is all I know, essentially, based upon the basic knowledge that I have.
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on. But I think the other dimension of this question is that when we're talking about viral load, what we also do not understand is what are the true contributory factors, as Dr. Chotani said, to that viral load. And hand hygiene is important, because in the end, actually, we've seen that the virus lives on certain surfaces longer than many other viruses, which is a pretty established theory as far as the evidence goes at this point of time. It may change in future, but I mean, if you look at WHO recommendations and everything, there is a reasonable enough emphasis on the fact that this virus has more sustainability actually on solid surfaces compared to the previous viruses, which is one of the reasons probably why it is so commonly, it's so easily transmissible. So I think, I mean, so hand hygiene probably has a part to play, because yes, in the end, it will be through the droplet mode or through airborne mode, even if it is airborne. But, then those surfaces which you very commonly, we all have this habit of touching our faces, which is very difficult to stop ourselves from doing. So I think, I mean, that probably has a part to play, but yes, there is no conclusive evidence to that effect at this point of time.
Thank you. Just very quickly, a couple of things which I think we can just very briefly touch, because we have overrun a couple, probably around 15-20 minutes. So one question has been raised: is there a role of colchicine in COVID-19 patient? And I'm hoping that they are asking about colchicine and not HCQ. The other is there any evidence of finding the SARS-CoV-19 virus in the breath samples? So if you can just briefly touch on it, because we are very nearly coming to the close. Thank you.
I think the first question, I'm not aware of any studies being published on colchicine, unless Dr. Chitani, have you seen anything on that? No. Okay. The second question, I think there was a study recently out, which was from memory, I think it was in a good journal actually, and it was an Oxford run study, which did show that the virus does stay. It was not quite they did the breath test as well, and I think it did show that in COVID positive patients, actually there was evidence that it was in the breath, and that was one of the reasons why, if you see even those countries which were quite stubborn in terms of recommending masks in public, have started advocating that now. So I can't remember the data exactly, but I'm pretty certain that there was one paper out recently which I saw actually, and it showed positive evidence.
I agree with you, and I've seen that too. One of the other things that has to be considered is that initially everybody said coughing and sneezing, right? So there are some conclusive studies that have been done in some very big, in Japan and the United States, in some very major labs, which take a look at the projection of particulates that come out of the mouth while you're talking. And it is very, very clear that while I talk, I am emitting particulates in this room, in the ambient air, and they are spreading. And if I have COVID and the COVID is lodged right in my throat right here, and I'm talking, I can, I don't need to be a rocket scientist to say that, some of it is also coming out and being emitted in a very small manner. The dose might not be as strong as you can imagine. For while you're coughing or sneezing or yelling, but it is coming out. So, if you are wearing a mask, obviously you're protecting yourself and the other person. And now if you are 6 feet apart while wearing a mask, now I don't want you to be coming and hugging each other while wearing a mask either, because that defeats the purpose, because the mask that you're wearing is actually not, there's, except N95, there's no mask that is that has the quality of making sure that the tiny particle of this tiny little virus does not go inside the mask. Plus it has to be fitted so that your sides are not open, the top is not open. So masking is good, so that you're not emitting all the virus from coughing, sneezing, or talking or yelling. I hope you're not. And then you're keeping the distance. And if you keep the distance 6 feet while wearing a mask, the chances of transmission are definitely reduced.
Thank you very much. I have seen the hand raised from Professor Khanani. Is it old or is it new? Did you want to say something else? If yes, can you please unmute yourself?
In fact, just a couple of things about Dr. Khurram Khan's response. That certain studies in China, they concluded that the virus does not remain culturable. Even the PCR test is positive after 10 or 12 days of infection. And whatever disease continues is in fact perpetuation of the body's response to the damages caused by the virus. And that's a very important thing, because we must know that how long the virus remains viable in a human body. So that's again, these are my remarks. Any comments from Dr. Chotani?
Yes, I'd like to make a small comment on that. And those studies are obviously very important studies. China produces very good studies. They are very, very good in science. But one thing that I have to suggest is that at certain point, the virus from a PCR perspective disappears it doesn't really stay in the nasopharyngeal passage for a long time. Once the PCR goes down, or the results or the positivity goes down, the antibody test then takes over, because now the virus can potentially be circulating in the blood. So both of these things have to be looked at very carefully to be able to say that the virus is not in the body at that particular point. So yes, the PCR could be negative, but then if you do serology studies, you might still detect the virus in the blood. You know, again, anecdotal information over here with the individual I was telling you, my partner who got who developed COVID, unfortunately, you know, 16 days later, he was still positive for antibody. Now, that's not necessarily the case with everybody. 18 days we checked him, and we were checking him every day, and he was positive again. So it took a long time for him to get rid of the virus. I mean, to be honest about it, not enough data and information available on it for me to conclusively say how long does it take for the virus to completely disappear from the body, and then the body, because of the reaction of different organs in the body to the virus, are acting up, and you're having all kinds of different symptoms.
I can very quickly add one point, actually, because this is a very interesting observation. And there was a study actually published from the UK group, which showed that there was 30% false negative results when you tried to do the test from the nasopharyngeal area, whilst those patients who were negative and they were admitted with severe disease, when bronchoscopically the samples were obtained, the positivity was 89%. So there was about 19% gap. So I think this is why whilst, I mean, again, as you very rightly said, the Chinese data, we have to learn from every published literature. But I think, I mean, because obviously with the COVID, one of the biggest challenges was that all the journals allowed. I mean, there was a point on a funny note that I had a 26 patient study, which I went to NEJM, which I sent to NEJM, and they actually sent it for review. It got rejected in the end. But, you know, to meet NEJM's criteria with 26 patients was absolutely unbelievable. So I think the point is that they were accepting a lot of studies just because it was a public health issue. So we can't, you know, we have to be sensible in terms of the risk-benefit ratio of certain procedures and studies as well.
Thank you very much. I think the last thing which I would address is that because I think there are quite a few, as Soomro Saab has alluded, people from the PPHI, which is a primary care organization, there are quite a few questions around the chronicity of symptoms in people who have recovered. And I suspect that that is something which is going to happen in primary care. And certainly, you know, a lot of institutions in the UK have, in fact, set up COVID follow-up clinics. So it is likely that this is going to continue. So there's quite a few questions as to, you know, how long the disease will last and how chronic the symptoms can be. And I think that has been addressed by Dr. Chotani already with the past experiences with coronaviruses of a different nomenclature. So I won't, you know, go into more detail, but yes, in the primary care, we are expected to see chronicity of symptoms like fatigue and in fact some anxiety related issues as well. So it will be best if we direct our readings to the past experiences, which Dr. Chotani has alluded to. In the context of the feedback from the PPHI CEO, we will, you know, Mr. Soomro, Saeed Soomro and Mr. Ansari are the focal people who coordinate teaching and training, and I'm sure that they will be, and you can be in touch with them, and certainly if there's a need for further educational sessions geared towards primary care, the impact would definitely, you know, help organize it. If I think we are pretty much towards the end, and I thank very much to both the speakers, and particularly, you know, it's around probably nearly 5 o'clock in Virginia. So special thanks to Prof. Chotani to afford this time, and Khurram, thank you very much again, and all the organizers and all the participants. I hope that this session was useful. We are open to feedback, and certainly if there are questions which have been unanswered, and I apologize that I was not able to cover everything because of the paucity of time towards the end, if you can send questions via the impact email address which has been disseminated or via the focal persons, we will try and get back to you with relevant answers. So thank you very much again. I hope everyone had a good day and Prof. Shotani has a reasonable sleep while the sun comes out.
Me,
yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry to interrupt you. You welcome, by the way. लेकिन मुझे ये पूछना है कि वो फॉर्म कहाँ से डाउनलोड होगा?
Okay, I think we have shared that form. If you go into the chat, the form has been shared. Mr. Ansari or Mr. Soomro, you want to just give us?
I can see it actually here.
So if you go into the group chat on your Zoom session, you will find that form has been shared. The impact feedback form has been shared as a Word file.
I am here, but I am.
Okay, I just want to add something. This is Saeed. If you have got any issues in terms of form, you can, message us on Facebook. So we can, forward you form over there. We have got the Impact Facebook page. If you message over there, we will forward you all the information.
Okay.
Actually, the form is downloaded, but it is not edited. I wanted to write it, but I couldn't.
Form है तो मुझे तो नजर ही.
I think the form, we will make sure that, if you look at the Zoom session, it will be available. And as Mr. Soomro said, it will be available via the Facebook page. If you, it probably will have to be filled in with pen and, and then scanned and sent across. So we will be very grateful for any feedback. Thank you very much again to everybody who has participated, including the Impact team who have set up a great program. Thank you, and inshallah see you soon in the next session. Thank you, Dr. Khan and Dr. Chotani. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.